Welcome to Super Aging. I'm Marianne from One Life to Flourish. I'm a wellness coach and an intuitive healer, and I focus on helping women who are at midlife deal with all of the confusion, the carry on of that time of their life, so that they can come back with a renewed sense of purpose, of passion, and just kind of knowing where they're going. Now, as part of the process, I support women through designing a life that's going to help the second half of their life be really healthy and positive for them for as long as possible. And it's because of this interest that it's led me to actually look at things like longevity and self-healing. So tonight on Super Aging, I'm looking at the question, what are 3 things we can change with our food to switch on our longevity genes? So some of these I've talked about before, but I'm just going to kind of go through them again. And some of it might be some food for thought, so to speak. So the first thing is really looking at your diet itself. And this is based on looking at some of the people who have the longest lives around the world. So these are people who are in specific locations in Japan, in Costa Rica, and in Italy. And they've been researched and questioned and whatever to see why they've lived so long. So if you want to find out a bit more about them, that's kind of from the Blue Zones books by Dan Buettner. Quite interesting to read. So what's the things to take away from the books, essentially? So essentially it's about eating more vegetables and fruits, eating more legumes, and eating whole grains. And then eating less meat, less dairy products, and way less sugar. And focusing on the things that you're eating being fresh food rather than processed food. All right, so that all of those elements are also part of the, I suppose, Mediterranean diet as well. So they're key features that have been talked about and researched and found to actually increase your lifespan. Hi Adair, I did actually say that we should be reducing our amount of sugar to as low as possible. And sugar tends to be in processed foods anyway. So let me just recap. You're eating more vegetables and fruits. You're eating more legumes, beans and those kinds of things, and you're eating more whole grains. So the reverse side of that is eating less meat. I'm going to talk a bit more about that shortly. Eating less dairy products and eating less sugar. So there's some basic things. So sugar is an interesting one, and I might talk about that a little bit later. But essentially, if you're eating a whole food, the way that it is put together means that your body can process it in a better way. So if you're talking about natural sugars in fruits, they're fine so long as you're not having them in fruit juice where they become concentrated and a bit more like the sugar you'd be getting in chocolate bar. All right, if they are part of a fruit, and it does vary from fruit to fruit, so you can't just do it too generalized, but essentially you're having it as a whole fruit, then the fiber and other parts of the fruit can offset the sugar and the way that the sugar is taken into your body. Honey, because it's got other health benefits, it can be useful, but I wouldn't be having huge amounts of it. Okay, any other questions there before I move on? I do enjoy your questions. All right, so the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is something that can be taken to extremes, can be misunderstood, can have a lot of resistance. No, been there, done that. I have actually, dabbled in this, and this is to do with fasting. So Oh, thanks, Adair. So fasting is essentially about limiting how many calories we're actually consuming. So just long-term research has shown that reducing your calories can actually help you to live a longer and healthier life. And it also does actually, as part of the way it works in your body, it does actually switch on some of those longevity genes that we really want to try and switch on. Now, for example, because I've already talked about some of the long-lived people around the world, the Okinawans, who are the people from Japan, they actually actively try and consume 20% fewer calories compared to other similar groups in Japan, say on the mainland or whatever. Hi, Mary. So basically, good to see you. They've been proven to actually have a longer life, obviously, because they're part of that research. So the other thing is restricting your calories, and it is by sort of the 20%. Some people say 30%, but there's a bit of debate around this. But actually reducing your calories has been shown to really help reduce diseases such as cardiac disease, diabetes, stroke, and cancer. And let's face it, they're the ones that are quite the large groups of killers, so to speak, as we age. Now, one area that has really become quite interesting to do with reducing your calorie intake is the idea of intermittent fasting. Now, this is where you eat fairly normally, but you have periods without meals. And the benefit of this seems to be in how it gives your body rest times that can be helpful for it to regenerate. So one way that some groups of people, and this one group that's been part of the research is a community in China who basically go for about 16 hours without consuming food, and then they will eat, I think it's usually around lunchtime, they'll eat a smallish meal, and then they'll have a really good community meal around twilight. So they basically have 2 meals a day, but they have 16 hours where their body is actually resting from having to process food. So this has been shown to be beneficial. Yes, and I would agree, Adair, that basically if you are practicing, things around reducing your calories or intermittent fasting, your body does get used to it, and you can kind of notice the benefits from doing it. All right, so basically fasting, read up a little bit on that. It's quite an interesting area. I'd say intermittent fasting is quite doable for most people, but take it under advice, essentially. All right, now the third thing I'm going to talk about is really to do with things that we probably need to reduce, and some it would actually be really beneficial for our longevity to actually eliminate from our diet altogether. So we're getting a little bit controversial again with this one, and this has to do with our meat consumption. So remember I said I was going to come back to this. So basically there have been huge numbers of studies on our meat consumption, and the studies have shown that we actually should be reducing the amount of meat that we eat. So if you are having a diet that is really heavily based on animal proteins, as in the largest portion of your food, then you will actually have an increased likelihood of dying through some cardiovascular disease and also an increased cancer risk. So this is why the recommendation now is to really reduce the amount of meat you're eating, and in particular red meat. So, I mean, to full disclosure, I I don't eat meat at all. Okay, that's a choice that I've made based on things that I've read around research. But I don't expect everyone else to do that. You do have to know what you're doing if you're going to basically eliminate meat. So that's our reducing side of things. We really need to reduce our meat consumption. But there are some kinds of meats that we should probably not consume at all. So this is our processed red meats. So these are extremely carcinogenic. In other words, cancer causing. And this has been shown across numerous, maybe even hundreds of studies over the long term. And it's actually been proven that there is a connection between these kinds of meats and things like colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, and prostate cancer. So red meat that is processed should really be something that you eliminate. Yes, let me just put this one up. So we've kind of got Mary, who's not into a lot of protein. So hopefully that's not a lot of meat protein, because you should be having protein from vegetables. So having like your legumes and that kind of thing. And then we've got Adair, who's, I know, living on her boat, enjoys lots of freshly caught fish, which is also a good thing to have in your diet because of other things that you get from fish. So now where did I get to with our meat? Okay, so basically meat is useful to eat because it does contain 9 essential amino acids, and that's a good thing because we need them for our body processes. But the way that animal protein is broken down in our body actually creates almost more of a negative downside than to the benefit of having the essential amino acids. And there's also a little bit of research around the fact that getting your amino acids from plants actually sets off another one of these longevity processes in the body. So some quite interesting research around that. There's still a little bit to do on, the amino acids and that kind of thing, but really quite interesting. So the things that you should try to eliminate in terms of meat are your processed red meats, so sausages, hot dogs, ham, bacon. They're the ones, and those kinds of ones. They really are quite dangerous, I suppose, because of the extremely carcinogenic properties of them. All right, so a few things to think about. I always like to give you some things to think about, a little bit of a challenge there. So basically, see if you can adopt a pattern of eating that's high in your fresh vegetables, including some fruits. Have lots of legumes, lots of whole grains. Be low in meat, particularly red meat. Low in dairy, low in sugar, or if you can, eliminate sugar as well, because a whole lot of story around that. Try and put in some kind of calorie restriction. Intermittent fasting is a fairly easy way to go. And if you're doing those things, you'll actually be starting to switch on your longevity genes. Okay, so if you would like some support and information about improving your midlife and actually switching on your longevity, this is something that we do have a little bit of information on in the private Facebook group, The Magic of Midlife. I have put a link into the comments for that one. And also the next intake of my Midlife Healing Journey program is starting quite soon. I only limit the places to 4 amazing women. So if you are interested, just put yes in the comments if you'd like to know more, and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, have a great week. Think a little bit about what you're eating. think about how you might adjust things. So next week, I'm going to be touching on something that has actually been a little bit of a confrontational thing for me to deal with, to be honest. And this is looking at the impact of temperature on longevity. So some interesting things around that. So come back next week to find out more about that. In the meantime, have a really great week. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.